Y'all, sit down. Grab a drink. Lock the door. Because what I'm about to walk you through is not a story, it's not a rumor, and it's damn sure not a somebody said. This is a full-blown, on-camera, out-her-own-mouth confession that Claressa Shields didn't even realize she was giving, and once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Claressa Shields, the loudest woman in women's boxing, the self-declared GWOT, the queen of the caption, the wife-in-waiting of a man who is still legally married to somebody else, just handed the entire internet a psychological receipt so devastating that Remy Ma doesn't even have to speak. Claressa Shields spoke for her. And baby, once I break this thing down piece by piece, you're going to understand why this Papoose situation is not built to survive the year. It's your girl, and welcome back to the breakdown. Hit that subscribe, tap the bell, drop a comment before you leave, because we are cracking this whole thing wide open right now. Let me set the table. In the last 2 weeks, 3 things happened almost back to back. Claressa Shields dropped an interview where she calmly, deliberately explained how she built her brand by studying other women fighters and, in her own words, channeling their looks, their bodies, their gimmicks, and their stories. Claressa Shields then posted a soft launch photo with Papoose captioned, "A queen and her king," while Papoose is, at the time of that caption, still legally married to Remy Ma. And Claressa, on top of all that, has been quietly releasing music, captions, interviews, and comment section receipts designed to convince you that this relationship is untouchable, unbothered, and ordained. 3 moves. 1 woman. And every single one of them screams the same thing if you know what you're listening for. Here's the promise I'm making you right now, so you know exactly what you're staying for. By the end of this video, you're going to see, with your own eyes and your own ears, how Claressa Shields told herself in 11 different ways in a single sit-down. You're going to understand why psychologists have a specific term for what she is doing, and it's not flattering. And you're going to walk away with a very uncomfortable question about who she actually is when nobody is watching, when nobody is clapping, and when the cameras finally cut off. So don't swipe. Don't scroll. Because the second half of this is where the ground opens up. Let me start where Claressa Shields herself started. In her own interview, Claressa explained, and I want you to really hear this, that she looked at the biggest names in women's boxing history and asked herself what each of them had that she was missing. She listed Laila Ali. She listed Mia St. John. She listed Christy Martin. She listed Ann Wolfe. She listed Lucia Ridgker. And then Claressa Shields, a grown, decorated, multiple-time world champion, announced to the world that she sat down and mentally mixed and matched pieces of these women like she was building a character in a video game. Laila Ali's looks, Mia St. John's body, Christy Martin's storyline, and Wolfe's aggression. She said it plainly. She said she was going to channel them. Not learn from them. Not honor them. Channel them. And that word choice, my friend, is where the entire psychological floor drops out. Because here is what a secure person does. A secure person says, I admire her discipline. I studied her footwork. I learned from her mistakes. A secure person absorbs technique and keeps her own identity intact. That is normal. That is healthy. That is how every athlete on earth grows. But she did not describe a technical study. Claressa Shields described an identity assembly line. Claressa described taking one woman's chest, another woman's face, another woman's aggression, and another woman's backstory and gluing them onto herself to build a marketable product. And when a grown woman tells you, on camera, that she constructed her public self out of the harvested parts of other women, psychologists, real ones, have a name for this pattern. And we're going to get to it. But first, pay attention to what Claressa Shields did not admire. She didn't mention discipline. She didn't mention mental toughness. She didn't mention business acumen. She didn't mention leadership. She didn't mention resilience. She mentioned breasts. She mentioned faces. She mentioned makeup. She mentioned nails. She mentioned the gift of gab. She mentioned who was pretty and who, in her exact words, was very manly. A woman who tells you her scouting report on other women is a physical inventory is not describing admiration. She is describing an obsession. And that obsession has a direction. Now here is where I need you to lean in, because this next part is the part that made me have to pause the interview and rewind it 3 times. Claressa, of all the fighters she named, singled out exactly one to insult. Christy Martin. Claressa Shields called Christy Martin manly. Claressa called Christy Martin not a pretty woman. Claressa Shields even laughed while doing it. And I want you to hold that receipt in your hand for a moment, because she, for years, has been the loudest defender of her own femininity against a public that has repeatedly questioned it. Claressa Shields has been called masculine online more times than any of us can count. And now, in front of a running camera, Claressa is dragging another female boxer for the exact word she herself has spent a decade defending against. That is not admiration. That is not analysis. That is a woman looking in a mirror and throwing the rock at the reflection. Psychologists have a term for that. It's called reaction formation. It's when a person unconsciously fears a trait about themselves, and in order to convince the world, and mostly themselves, that they don't have that trait, they aggressively attack anyone who displays it. It is one of the most well-documented defense mechanisms in the entire field. And Claressa Shields didn't just brush up against it. Claressa walked into the middle of it with the lights on. And the more you rewatch that clip, the more obvious it becomes that Claressa Shields wasn't roasting Christy Martin. Claressa was arguing with a version of herself she is terrified people can see. Let me hit you with the next layer before you catch your breath, because Claressa Shields is not done telling on herself. Remember the Remy Ma comparisons that have followed her for the last year? The Bronx-inflected slang. The "are you dumb" cadence. The wardrobe choices. The fashion pivots. The mannerisms. For over a year, people online have been screenshotting side-by-sides of Claressa Shields dressing like Remy Ma, talking like Remy Ma, and even reaching out to Remy Ma years ago asking for styling advice, receipts that are still floating around the timeline. And every time somebody pointed it out, Claressa and her camp cried, coincidence. Well, Claressa Shields just torpedoed her own defense. Because of that same interview, she openly admitted, in her own voice, that she studies other women and stitches parts of them into herself. She said it. Not me. Not Remy Ma. Not the bloggers. Claressa Shields. And once a woman confesses to the pattern on tape, the coincidence argument dies in the water. And that brings us to Papoose. Because if Claressa is a woman who admits she assembles her identity from pieces of other women, what happens when the woman she is closest to, the woman whose whole life she has been inserting herself next to, is Remy Ma? What happens when the man she now claims as her king is the man who spent nearly 2 decades building a public marriage with Remy Ma? What happens when a serial identity collector attaches herself to another woman's husband? I'll tell you what happens. You get exactly what we are watching in real time. You get a woman who cannot stop performing the relationship. You get a woman who has to broadcast her loyalty. You get a woman who has to release music about the man. You get a woman who has to caption every photo like a wedding announcement. You get a woman who has to convince you, and convince you, and convince you, because deep down she is trying to convince herself. Let me walk you through the caption alone. A queen and her king. For words. Sounds harmless if you're not paying attention. But context is everything. Because that caption was posted while Papoose is, in the eyes of the state, still Remy Ma's legal husband. That caption was posted after months of Claressa Shields insisting the relationship was private, which is a word women love to use when they mean hidden. That caption was posted after Remy Ma herself had to be the one to break the seal publicly. Claressa did not step into the light on her own. Claressa Shields was pulled into it. And ever since she got pulled into it, she has been on a non-stop press tour trying to sell you a fairy tale that the paperwork has not yet caught up to. You want to know the psychological red flag? Secure Love does not host a weekly press conference. Secure Love does not need a caption strategy. Secure Love does not drop a whole song titled after the man to reassure the block. Compare Claressa Shields' approach to how Remy Ma carried the same man for nearly 20 years. Count the interviews Remy Ma gave begging you to believe Papoose loved her. Count the captions Remy Ma wrote insisting he was faithful. Count the songs Remy Ma dropped announcing he was hers. You can't count them because they don't exist in that volume. Remy Ma didn't need to sell you the marriage. The marriage sold itself. That is what secure looks like. What Claressa is doing is the opposite of secure. What Claressa Shields is doing is what psychologists call reassurance seeking, and when reassurance seeking is aimed at a public audience instead of a partner, it usually means the partner isn't giving the reassurance she needs privately. And here is the part that is going to age like milk in a Miami parking lot. Claressa keeps insisting that everybody who questions the relationship is jealous, broke, or hating. Every single time. Somebody could ask Claressa Shields what time it is, and if the answer doesn't flatter the relationship, that person is suddenly a hater with a low credit score. Think about how that logic works from the inside. If every observer is a hater, then no observation is real. If no observation is real, then the pattern doesn't exist. If the pattern doesn't exist, then she doesn't have to look at it. That is not confidence. That is a psychological moat, and Claressa Shields is digging it wider every week. Because the alternative, the possibility that some of these observers are simply telling the truth, is a mirror Claressa is not emotionally equipped to stand in front of yet. Claressa Shields cannot conceive of a world in which a stranger looks at her situation and simply notices a pattern. Because to admit that strangers are noticing a pattern would require her to admit the pattern exists. And to admit the pattern exists would require Claressa Shields to look at her own reflection, the same reflection she was already throwing rocks at when she was talking about Christy Martin. So instead, Claressa flattens every observer into hater, blocks them, and screenshots them, and DMs them, and, when she's really in her feelings, allegedly logs into burner accounts to fight strangers in comment sections. That is not the behavior of a queen. That is the behavior of a woman whose crown does not fit. Let me connect one more receipt for you, because the internet has not forgotten. Claressa Shields, when confronted about DMs, publicly declared that any woman sliding into her man's inbox is diabolical, weird, and blockable. Claressa drew a very hard line about the sanctity of a man's inbox. But baby, Claressa Shields is on tape from years ago, describing how Papoose reached out to her back in 2020 while he was married. Claressa is on tape saying she happened to bump into him, shook his hand, told him she was a fan, and then, oh by the way, he'd met her a video afterward. So Claressa Shields' rule is not actually don't slide into a married man's DMs. Her rule is don't slide into a MY man's DMs after I already did. That is cognitive dissonance in a designer bag. That is the standard flipping mid-sentence based on which side of the situation she is standing on. And once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. Take a breath, because we are only halfway in, and it gets worse. Way worse. And I want to warn you now, the next section is where I stopped feeling entertained and started feeling concerned. Because when the pattern I'm about to describe shows up in ordinary people, it costs them relationships. When it shows up in famous people, it costs them legacies. And when it shows up in famous people who happen to be dating somebody else's husband on camera, it costs everybody involved. Including the kids watching. Including the fans defending. Including Claressa Shields herself. So keep listening, because this is the part that matters. Let's talk about the song. Because Claressa did not just caption. Claressa Shields did not just interview. Claressa recorded and released actual music declaring, in melody, that this man is faithful, this man is a provider, this man is a protector, and this love is real, all while the man is still on paper as somebody else's husband. Let that sink in. Not a poem. Not a private letter. A song. Distributed. Marketed. Pushed to streaming platforms. Claressa Shields wanted a public record of the affirmation because she, in her heart, does not have the private version of it. If she did, she wouldn't need the streaming version. Nobody who feels safe in love builds a marketing campaign around it. Nobody. You know who builds marketing campaigns? People with a product they're trying to move before the returns start piling up. And here is the part where I want to slow all the way down, because this is the moment the ground opens under Claressa Shields' entire narrative. Claressa, in interview after interview, describes herself as a woman who manifests. A woman who speaks things into her life. A woman who understands, in her words, that there is an energy attached to every move. Fine. I love that for her. But manifestation does not care about your intention paperwork. Manifestation responds to the frequency you are actually broadcasting. And the frequency Claressa Shields is broadcasting is not, I built a healthy family. The frequency Claressa is broadcasting is, I have to prove this is real, because part of me knows it isn't. You cannot manifest a peaceful home while simultaneously mocking the woman whose home you took a chair from. You cannot manifest loyalty while campaigning against the previous wife's dignity. The universe is not a fool. And the universe keeps the receipts even when the internet forgets them. Now let me put on the psychology hat one more time and give you the framework so you can carry this with you long after this video is over. What Claressa Shields is displaying in aggregate is not one flaw. It is a stack. Identity construction, the assembling of self from harvested pieces of other women. Reaction formation, the aggressive rejection of a trait she suspects lives inside her. Reassurance seeking, the need to have the public confirm the private thing over and over again. Cognitive dissonance, the ongoing collision between her stated standards and her actual behavior. Projection, the accusation of jealousy against anyone who mirrors back a truth she can't hold. That is not one woman having a bad month. That is a psychological blueprint. And the blueprint is on tape. In her own voice. On her own timeline. In her own captions. In her own lyrics. In her own DMs. Claressa is not being ambushed. Claressa Shields is autobiographing. And here is the twist that most of the internet is missing while they argue in the comments. Remy Ma has, in this entire storyline, said almost nothing. Think about that. The woman who is legally the wife has barely spoken. The woman who is not the wife will not stop speaking. The wife is composed. The other woman is composing songs. The wife is protected by silence. The other woman is exposed by volume. Every time she grabs a mic to defend the situation, Claressa Shields is not silencing Remy Ma. Claressa is amplifying Remy Ma. Because in every clip, in every caption, in every queen and her king moment, the public is being reminded who the actual queen legally is. That is the trap. That is the mirror. And Claressa Shields keeps walking straight into it. I want to say something plain to the women watching this, and I want you to take it wherever you need to take it. When somebody has to keep telling you they are winning, they are not winning. When somebody has to keep telling you they are loved, they are not sure. When somebody has to keep telling you the relationship is untouchable, the relationship is already leaking. Real peace does not require a public relations department. Real love does not need a press release. Real security does not run a burner account. If Claressa had what she says she has, we would never have to hear about it, because it would be so obvious it would speak for itself. The loudest woman in the room is almost never the most confident. The loudest woman in the room is the one most terrified you are about to figure her out. Let me give you one more piece before we land the plane, because this one is the receipt that closes the case. Claressa Shields, when asked point-blank why she thinks strangers keep showing up in her comments, delivered an answer that told on her without her realizing it. Claressa said, and I'm paraphrasing, but the spirit is exact, that if she doesn't like somebody, she simply doesn't go to their page. She doesn't follow them. She doesn't comment. She stays clear. Which sounds mature. Which sounds evolved. Which sounds like the kind of thing a grown woman with a settled spirit would say. Except we have seen her do the opposite of that in real time. We have seen the burner accounts. We have seen the receipts of her friend allegedly going behind the scenes to smear another woman on her behalf. We have seen Claressa respond to comments she claimed she never read. So the statement is not a description of who she is. The statement is a description of who Claressa wants you to believe she is. And in psychology, the gap between the stated self and the observed self is called the incongruence gap. The wider the gap, the more unstable the identity underneath. And her gap right now is Grand Canyon wide. And that brings me to what I believe is coming next, and I say this without a shred of joy, because I do not root for any woman to fall. I root for women to wake up. But when a relationship is built on this many overlapping red flags, a still legal marriage, a serial identity assembler, a mocking song, a caption campaign, a projection engine, a reassurance dependency, a documented history of DMs and burner accounts, the math tells you what the timeline is going to tell you. This does not end quietly. This does not end privately. This ends the exact way the beginning played out, loudly, publicly, on our timelines, with receipts and with Remy Ma, once again, needing to say almost nothing. And when it happens, remember where you heard it broken down first. Not with hate. With patterns. Because patterns don't lie. Before I let you go, I want you to do one thing for me. I want you to scroll back up to the top of Claressa's Instagram, listen to that Queen and Her King caption one more time, and then ask yourself the question I've been asking for the last 20 minutes. Who is she trying to convince? Because it is not us. It never was. It's the woman in the mirror, the one still built out of everybody else's parts, still trying to find the piece that belongs to her alone. And until she finds that piece, no man, no belt, no caption, no song, and no crown is going to feel like it fits. One last thought before I sign off, and I want you to sit with this one, because it is the thought that has been rattling around my head for 3 days straight. When a woman spends this much energy convincing the world she has arrived, she has usually not yet unpacked. When a woman spends this much energy insulting the woman who came before her, she is usually terrified of becoming her. And when a woman spends this much energy assembling herself from the mannerisms, wardrobes, accents, and men of other women, the version she is presenting is not a self. It is a costume. And costumes come off. Sometimes they come off on their own. Sometimes life pulls them off. Sometimes another woman, quietly, without ever raising her voice, simply waits, and the costume comes off in front of the whole room. I don't know which one is coming for Claressa, but one of them is. And she is going to have to figure out who she is underneath before that day arrives, or that day is going to figure it out for her. If this breakdown hit you the way it hit me while I was writing it, do me a favor. Smash that like button so YouTube keeps this in front of the right eyes. Drop me a comment and tell me one specific moment in Claressa's interview that made your jaw hit the floor, because I want to see if you caught the same ones I did. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one, because I am already sitting on the follow-up that connects Claressa to another woman she has been quietly mimicking that nobody is talking about yet. That one is going to break the internet. And I'll see you back here for it. Take care of yourselves. Watch the patterns in your own life. And remember, behavior leaves clues. Every single time.